My name is Meredith Cabezas, and today I'd like to share with you a poem that has kind of a funny story behind it. So one day I was going for a walk in my neighborhood, and I passed a house that had a little basket in the front, and the basket had a sign on it that said, "Got poetry?" And there were a bunch of these little papers rolled up inside. So I grabbed one and continued my walk. And little did I know that this poem that I found would mean so much to me. And it was written by a man named Glenn Fitch, who lived in that house and blessed his neighborhood with his poetry and his poems that were always in a little basket in his front yard. Sadly, he passed away a couple of months ago, but I'd really like to read this poem that I feel like is very fitting for everything that we're experiencing right now, and I hope that it encourages and challenges you the same way that it did me. I Commit by Glenn Fitch. I commit to change my life today. I'll not ignore injustice, covet what I haven't got, repress or pity myself, placate, plot. I can, no matter what I've done before, create the person that I want to be. I'll look for lessons when I feel attacked. I'll own my feelings, think before I act. I know I can live shouldless, shameless, free. Today I will not take or risk my life, nor harm myself by little suicides. I'll shun what sabotages me, or hides my worth, or aggravates my inner strife. And as I dare today to show my face, I vow to make our world a better place.
When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand with me. So won't you stand with me? Oh, stand with me. Won't you stand with me? If the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, or the mountains should crumble down to the sea, I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand with me. Won't you stand with me? Oh, stand with me. Won't you stand with me? Won't you stand with me? Oh, stand with me. Won't you stand with me?
Happy Sunday.
greater purpose. You are welcomed, you are affirmed, and you are loved at this table that is set for kindred shakers of empire, the fiercely hospitable and devout arbiters of goodwill toward humanity. A couple of announcements really quick. In the description of this video is our Zoom room cocktail hour room number. Join us after the sermon. You are more than welcome to attend and enjoy an adult beverage with us. Who's going to judge you? You're drinking in your house, right? Secondly, we are not collecting tithes at all. We ask that if you have a need and if you feel comfortable, and consent's important, right? Put the need in the comment section of this video. In church, if you can, if you have access, help each other meet your needs during this time of crisis, because we're all in this together. Get your grain product, just a cracker, a piece of bread or something. Get you a glass of wine, set it to the side, because we are going to have communion at the end of the service. Also, get you an adult beverage, because the more you drink, the better my sermons are. I guarantee it. And also, if you could, share this video on your page. And if you could, click that watch party button. That's going to help spread the word to people that may need to hear a message that is centered around progressive Christianity and not evangelical nonsense for once. And finally, we talk about some heavy things here at the church. So if you got to hit that pause button and step away for a little bit, if something's triggering you, you are not judged. We understand. Stuff gets real here. These are PG-13 sermons. Topics get heavy. Language gets coarse. I'm Irish. What you gonna do? All right, so there's something that I have to address before we get started, because I'm not sure if I've ever misused this phrase before, but the word Israeli is not applicable to anyone that is depicted in the scriptures. Israelis did not come about until 1948, when Israel became a nation state. The term for people described in the Hebrew Bible is Israelite or ancient Hebrews, because Israelites were people that resided in the region that would become the kingdom of Israel, and ancient Hebrews are just people that spoke the Hebrew language. So both of those are applicable. And actually, in truth, we can't even use the term Jew at this point, because there were no Jews technically at this point in history. The term Jew comes from the word Yehud, which was a region that was in this Near Eastern area that the Persians allowed the Israelites to come back and live after their exile. So this was after the Persians had conquered the region. So, and even then, at that point, it's a descriptor of those that dwelled in that area. It was not an ethnic identity. That did not occur until much later. So the term Jewish, as far as an ethnic identity, would not happen until much later in history. Now, all that being said, today we are moving on to the book of Judges. It's like Game of Thrones, except not terrible at the end. Now, as I mentioned in previous weeks, the ancient Israelites were opposed to a monarchy for a multitude of reasons. And they were opposed to a monarchy for quite some time during their developmental years. And this is likely because they knew the nature of power and saw firsthand that absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. And America has been learning this lesson the hard way. We've been learning it ever since 1776. But again, the Israelites were very much so opposed to any form of imperial rule. But anyone with a basic understanding of key characters within the Hebrew Bible knows that this changes, because Saul, David, and Solomon were all kings that would rule when Israel would become a kingdom. So what happened beforehand? What led to this moment? You see, Israel was divided into an alliance of Canaanite tribes, and some were monotheistic, they believed in one God. Some were polytheistic, they believed in many gods. And there is often verses that describe 12 tribes of Israel. That's the number we understand. That was the number of tribes that were depicted in the Hebrew Bible. Historically, there was probably more or less depending on what time period we were talking about. But 12 is the number you will see depicted in the scriptures. Now, ancient historiographies, hang on, wait, I'm going to get that word down. Hold on. I got it. Ancient historiographies, there we go, like books of the Hebrew Bible, were far more concerned with inscribing perceived moral truths and attempting to explain why something happened in their history rather than detailing exactly what happened in their history, unlike American history books, which claim to be accurate, but in truth are neither concerned with fact nor morality. So the Israelites definitely had a leg up on America. Now, up until this point in the scriptures, by the end of Joshua, the text depicted this regional alliance of these 12 tribes as an ideal scenario. These tribes worked in unison, they conquered regions in concert, and there was absolutely no internal conflict whatsoever. But the book of Judges, however, gives us a very different perspective about how these tribes work together. In the book of Judges, it seems like the number of tribes that would actually unite when necessary was limited to no more than 2 or 3. In fact, all the tribes didn't come together until the very end of the book when there's a civil war going on to eliminate one of the tribes. So definitely a less romanticized version of the nature of this tribal relationship. Now, the book of Judges describes the time period between the death of Joshua, the character that mythically conquered this region and distributed the lands between the 12 tribes of Israel that would become these 12 kind of nation states. And it's between that moment and the moment that Israel actually becomes a kingdom. Now, the book of Judges is named after 12 judges who were 12 mythic or exaggerated heroes within each tribe whose exploits served various roles in bringing about God's justice in various points in the history of the Israelites. None of these mythical heroes were meant to be idealized in any way, shape, or form. They were simply meant to be recognized as powerful figures. Believe me, they all had their fair share of issues. I don't know why evangelicals love to worship the character of these judges. They were not perfect in any way, shape, or form. Now, some of their names you might not be familiar with. They're judges like Yehud and Jephthah that a lot of people don't know anything about. But many of you might be more familiar with other judges, like Gideon, who was basically a weakling, man of very small stature and physical prowess, but ends up being a ruthless warrior. And then you have the total opposite of Gideon. You have Samson, who was basically the biblical version of Hercules. And Samson was strong in every way, shape, or form, except controlling his impulse because he was basically a sex addict. And then we actually have a judge who the Bible identifies as female. Deborah is often talked about in evangelical circles as strictly being a songwriter, but she was much more than a minstrel. She was actually a warrior, and not just a warrior, she was a general, a military general and a prophet. So if you use the Bible to spread sexism or misogyny or both, you might want to give Judges a second glance. Okay? Just saying. All right, so by the time we get to the end of the book of Judges, we see that the tribe is under constant attack. And the tribes have all fallen into a civil war. Now, according to the author, what led to this fracturing of ancient Israelite society was the Israelites disregarding the terms within their covenant, aka contract, with their God, Yahweh. And in this narrative, God actually doesn't want to give up on the people of Israel, even though they keep screwing up. Hence the need for God to raise up heroes, the judges. And from the moment Judges begins, the book begins, and these judges take the scene, God is definitely raising them up to rescue the Israelites from a prison of their own making. And the judge always delivers them. But the moment the judge dies, the Israelites fall right back into their former ways, or they become even worse. So what we see is the cyclical pattern of the Israelites violating their covenant, aka contract with their God Yahweh, which jeopardizes their claim to this region. We then see God being compassionate and establishing an anointed judge to rescue the Israelites. The Israelites are ultimately saved by the judge, and they recommit to following the terms of their covenant. The judge eventually dies, and the cycle begins anew, but with heavier and heavier stakes, kind of like the Democratic Party getting blips of true and ethical leadership, only to silence progressive candidates, continue to amplify moderate neoliberalism as the safe choice, and to compromise with the opposing party, and then inevitably lose to an uncompromising party that is getting more extremist and fascist as time goes on. I'm not mad. I'm not mad. All right. Now, unlike modern politics, the Israelites were no respecter of any form of imperial rulership. And that is certainly the case in Judges. Israel was like, hashtag not my president, more like hashtag fuck all your presidents. They did not believe in a figurehead at all. However, the artistry of the Deuteronomist authors of Judges is brilliant here because this narrative indicates that the author was actually trying to create a historiography to justify the need for a king. Because toward the end of Judges, we begin to see this phrase, and it's used in kind of a negative fashion. This phrase says this. It says, in those days there was no king. And it's followed by statements like people did as they pleased and as they saw fit individually. It's as if the author desires to indicate that it's their belief that Israel is falling into some form of disorder and a change of political structure is necessary. Thus, the story of the Judges served to almost manipulate the Israelites into submitting to imperial rulership. So kids, don't ever let anyone tell you that the Bible is not political, because it's all political. Like, it's definitely the one constant theme we see from beginning to end. And that's a good stopping point for us today. Because the author, as we can see today, is using a fabricated history in Judges to give reasoning for the rulership of corrupt kings. And though these characters in monarchy have been romanticized by evangelical churches, by authors that claim to be Christian, by pretty much every pulpit in America, these characters, Saul, Solomon, David, especially David, they were absolute scoundrels. They were not positive characters at all. And what we're seeing right now in America is a currently similar methodology to the author of Judges, because we are currently seeing something similar play out right before our very eyes. Hold on one second. This gets me upset. Donald Trump is twisting the conversation about protesters and Antifa to make it seem like these activists are terrorists. In reality, these protests for Black Lives Matter are mostly peaceful events. And also, most people that identify as Antifa are nonviolent. I know this because I are anti-fascist and I are nonviolent. Yes, I am Antifa. If you are anti-fascism, you are Antifa too. That's how it works. Donald Trump is not oblivious to this. It's not like he's mistaken. I've seen a lot of people say that. Oh, he just doesn't know. No. Donald Trump absolutely knows this. It's not like he isn't informed. He may be an ignorant turd waffle, but he is an informed, ignorant turd waffle. And though his brain may be filled with kitty litter and sawdust, I can assure you that the brains of the evil geniuses that are poster boys for white nationalism whispering in his ear on a daily basis, their heads are not filled with sawdust. They are conniving geniuses. Why the fuck do you think Donald Trump's first rally this year is on Juneteenth in fucking Tulsa, Oklahoma, the site of the Tulsa Massacre? And by the way, if you've never heard of the Tulsa Massacre, it's one of the most horrific and racist acts in American history. And that is saying a lot because, American history is pretty much a giant racist and horrific act. So if you've never heard of it, Google it. It is definitely something that you need to put into your homework list. Why do you think Donald Trump is doing something like that? Do you think it's just a happy coincidence that he's making that kind of public statement? Or maybe, just maybe, is Stephen Miller like the literal equivalent of Barty Crouch Jr.? And by the way, yes, that was a Harry Potter reference. J.K. Rowling, I wish I had time to get to you this week. Oh my gosh. But I'll tell you what, your books address how to combat bigotry and intolerance better than I ever could. So maybe just start by reading your own work and we'll get to you next week. But Trump's minions are intentionally spreading false narratives about nonviolent resistance because they need you to consent to their authoritarian directives. They need you to believe their lies so you will continue to drink their poisoned Kool-Aid. In Judges, the author accomplished a similar type of manipulation by saying, in those days, people did as they pleased. And in those days, there was no king. And now Donald Trump is doing the same thing to Americans by saying, in those cities, there is no law and order. These protests are mostly peaceful. What the hell are you talking about? Church, Christians to my left and to my right, do not fall for this BS. It is a trap. Do not fall for it. To quote Admiral Akbar, it's a trap. Don't fall for it. And most importantly, don't cower when your friends and when your family, when they recite and regurgitate this nonsense. Donald Trump villainizing liberationists must be confronted head on verbally and challenged at all cost. And if you offend your friends, if you offend your family, then good. If you have to cut them off because they cannot be reasoned with, great. If they cut you off because they are fragile little narcissists, even better. Because shame on us if this is to be the generation that gave another fascist our passive consent to ascend to tyrannical rule. Shame on America we allow that to happen. Because the truth is, church, false narratives are being spun to manipulate the American populace. It's happening right now. And what I've noticed is it's been happening. It's been happening for a while. Make America Great Again. Perfect example. What does that mean? I mean, think about it, right? Like, when was America great for everyone? I mean, I remember in history, it was definitely great for people that look like me, but ask Native Americans when America was great. Ask black citizens when America was great for their ancestors. America has never been great. So what does it exactly mean when Trump supporters say, make America great again? I can't tell you what they think it means, but I can tell you what Trump supporters appear to be saying. And if you are a Trump supporter and you made it this far in the message, for one, congrats. Wow, I'm surprised you stayed this long. But if you say, make America great again, it appears that you are saying that you value a time in history when white supremacy was more dominant in American society. It seems like you're saying that deep down you miss a more bigoted and closed-minded society. On the offshot that you do not mean things this way when you say make America great again. Let me explain this. You don't get to clutch your pearls if people take your love of Trump as embracing racism, because you're not ignorant of this country's past atrocities, and you are well aware of this Twitler's present wrongdoings. You know what he's doing wrong. Now, I'll give you this. Maybe back in 2016, maybe some Trump supporters were fooled to believe that MAGA meant a stronger economy like it was in the 60s. But if you were still on Team MAGA after the last 3 years, I mean, what else are we supposed to think? There are kids in cages. There are walls to the south and not to the north. Why do you think that is? There are protesters being called terrorists that are protesting peacefully. Even more peaceful protesters were called thugs for kneeling during the anthem. By the way, Anabaptists and Quakers have never stood for the anthem, and nobody said a thing. There are Nazis being called fine people by the President of the United States. Nazis. If you're still saying "Make America Great" after all this, then you can continue to excuse or deflect the label of you being racist however you want, but we all see through you. We all see exactly what you're doing. You may be a polite racist. You may be a racist light. You might be a diet racist, but you're a racist. Let's just be honest. I mean, you're brave enough to argue with people online. You're brave enough to challenge your family at the potluck when you show up wearing your MAGA hat. You might as well just admit it. You have internalized hatred of people that are not privileged in this society. And if that's a wake-up call for you, like let's say that me saying this is at least got you considering that, wow, maybe I do have internalized bias. There is good news, because you don't have to stay that way. You can change, and I know this because I did. Look, my past still haunts me to this very day as a former conservative evangelical. Every moment of every waking second, there's this moment of recollection where I relive the scenarios in which I caused someone immense pain under the guise of my good intent. Look, let me give you some examples, all right? There was a bisexual person in my high school that asked me in confidence, what happens when LGBT folks die? Where do they go? And the 18-year-old evangelical Christopher passionately told her that they go to hell. That their lifestyle is an abomination. I said that. And years later, that same person overdosed and died. They died. And I was still such a bigot that I was more upset about the possibility that this person didn't have salvation than I was that this person lost their life. I was more upset about their salvation than I was for their family that was experiencing loss. That's how misguided I was. 3 years later, good friends of mine, they were struggling in their marriage, and they said, what should we do? What's the biblical answer? And the 21-year-old version of me said, well, read this book. It teaches husbands to bravely step into their role as the head of the household, and women to submit to their husbands regardless. All right? A few years later, they're divorced because he was misogynistic and abusive. Surprise, surprise. And by the way, I'm divorced now. And part of the reason I'm divorced is because I was sexist and misogynistic. I don't pretend like that wasn't a factor in my previous relationships when I was an evangelical nut job. 1 year after that, my colleague, who was an atheist, asked me if it's okay to believe in evolution and still find beauty in the scriptures. And the 22-year-old evangelical version of myself fervently said, this is the literal word of God. If you don't believe that, what's the point of finding beauty in it? You're going to go to hell. Do you want to go to hell? A few years later, again, this person was much older than me. They died, never getting to experience any form of positive or progressive spirituality. 3 years after that, a pastoral colleague of mine, who was a person of color, asked me, Christopher, what are you doing to address racism within your ministry? And the 25-year-old version of me responded like any other Santa Cruzan, really, in any form of leadership would, and said, well, I'm teaching people not to see color, man. We're all God's children. Unconditional love solves everything. With my flowery version of the gospel. And a few years later, my oldest son, who was black, had an incident at a school when a student that was a white supremacist was caught on his way to school with a gun, and he had a list. And on that list were the kids of color were black students, and he was going to wipe them all out. Thank God he was stopped. Fast forward to today, and I am sickened by everything I just said. I am sickened about everything that I was. I always will be. But luckily for me, I finally changed my perspective about these topics and many other topics when my friends firmly called out my ignorance and my intolerance. At the time, I didn't enjoy that experience. I mean, who does? However, know this. Coddling me in my bullshit never, ever helped me. If anything, it perpetuated my path of destructive rhetoric and hateful ideals. So when you see me being abrasive, when you see me using this pulpit to say things in a very direct manner, it's not because I'm looking for an excuse to be an asshole. It's because I would give anything to have been stopped before I harmed another innocent person. I would give anything if someone would have intervened in my life sooner. Because sowing pain was never, ever my intent. But it was ultimately my impact. So listen up, privileged folks. Straight white fragility, it doesn't ever take kindly to any form of stern correction. But as a former bigot myself, to hell with their feelings. Stand up to your circle. Make a stand. Prevent these people from harming others, or at minimum, don't allow their manifestos to be uttered in your proximity unchallenged. Call out your friends. Call out your family. Be willing to cut them off if they cannot be reasoned with. Because the sad truth is that as privileged folks in a racist society, we often need to feel a consequence in order to reveal our own nature to ourselves. That exposes us for who we really are. Sometimes it takes that shock to the system. And they may despise you for your opposition and for your stand in the realm of the present, but they will be eternally grateful for your interference in the future. And if they truly are well-intentioned people, then they will live out the rest of their days only wishing that you're calling them out, that your objections had arrived sooner. Trust me, because there's not a day that goes by that I don't wish that someone would have got to me sooner. So tell your friends and tell your family when they show up to Thanksgiving or to the potluck wearing those tacky ass red hats that America has never been great. It has been powerful, and there's a difference, and it has always abused that power. And if you've never felt that oppression, if you've never been the victim of the abuse of that power, it's because you were created in the American system to be a benefactor to oppression, and you were not the designated target. You are privileged in that way, and you've got to acknowledge it. There's too many people that are telling you that they're oppressed right now for you to ignore their cries. And after all that has happened since Trump has come on the scene, if you still think that Trump is somehow a godly president, just know that I warned you in this sermon that eventually good people, people that love you, people that you claim to love, would eventually abandon you to your bubble of ignorance and intolerance. Because sometimes that's the only way to get people to listen. And if that offends you, if me telling you that people are eventually going to abandon you to your ignorance, then allow me to introduce you to all the fucks I have to give. Would you look at that? There's not any. I don't care, because I've had enough. It's been enough. Since 1776, since 1492, it's been enough. And the church must be the ones to lead this charge against racism, because they were the ones that hijacked the gospel to sow it in the first place. Recently, Trump's thugs, that's what I'm going to call them, they tear-gassed nonviolent dissenters and abused a priest on the way to have a photo op in front of a church that Trump doesn't even attend. And they did this in order to manipulate the populace. Kind of like the author of Judges was trying to manipulate the Israelites into believing they needed a corrupt king. Trump used the Bible to do the same thing. And that Bible in Trump's hands, I was surprised it didn't catch on fire. But that Bible in Trump's hand was not clasped in reverence at all. That Bible became a literal weapon of mass distraction against humanity. It became a weapon of destruction against democracy the moment that photo was taken. And as Christians, we should be appalled. We should be vocal in our objections to Trump using our Bible as a prop to spread his hateful manifestos. So to Trump, I say this: though I am anti-violent, you will not get my silence. You do not represent the qualities of the gospel. In fact, the only biblical character you remotely share any similarity with is literally the Antichrist. So church, if Jesus is Lord, then Trump is not. And I hate to burst your bubble, but you cannot serve both Jesus and Trump. So choose you this day whom you will serve. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, Jesus took bread and broke it, said, "This is my body, broken for you. Represents my flesh. Take and eat, and as often as you do, do so in remembrance of me." Likewise, he poured out some wine. He passed it to his disciples. He said, "This is my blood poured out for you. It represents a new covenant. Take and drink, and as often as you do so in remembrance of me." We often kind of pacify Jesus by ignoring the moments that preceded events like this and the moments that followed events like this. You see, sandwiched at the beginning and end of the Last Supper are two very interesting occurrences. Jesus, before the Last Supper, had committed acts of property destruction. Jesus had committed unfuzzy acts of subversion. And then preceding the Last Supper, Jesus publicly shamed a disciple that would betray the other disciples that would betray Judas. My prayer for us today as a church is that we become brave enough to go forth and do likewise. Even if it means calling out our friends, even if it means calling out our family, even if it means calling out the person that regrettably won the election. And until next week, may the revolution of Jesus go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you through the wasteland and protect you through the storm. May it lead you through the world seeking the justice it demands for you, and may it bring you home preparing to continue love's mission beyond your doors. And may the privileged among us be brave enough to fuck up the potluck if necessary. Grace and justice to you.